Hello and welcome to Manibil, and welcome to the part 2 or the second part of my deconstruction of David Hume's book Treatise of Human Nature, or A Treatise of Human Nature from 1739. And I came upon an idea which I've actually had before but sort of discarded earlier years back when I did some other deconstructions, that I might use a audiobook version of what I'm deconstructing to read it out loud, so I also save a bit of energy for myself, though I don't have to both concentrate on reading and thinking at the same time. And English is not my first language, so though I feel I'm decently good at English, right? Decently good, at least. But it sort of it also makes it easier for the listener to differentiate between when I'm reading aloud and when I am deconstructing or commenting. Obviously, in this case, right, if I use another reader to read out loud the text, of course it will be easy to differentiate, right? And I think I will try this on. I will have to turn the pages on the Kindle version of the book at the same time as the reader gets to the point where this page ends, and I might screw that up, and the audiobook may get ahead of the page. I hope not. But let's see how it goes, right? But I think I'll try this on. It's a more relaxing way of doing it, and I can better think about what to deconstruct, which I think that Hume deserves, right? Okay, so let's try it out.
File 3 of A Treatise of Human Nature by David Hume, Volume 1. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by George Yeager. Book 1 of The Understanding. Part 1 of Ideas, Their Origin, Composition, Connexion, Abstraction, etc. Section 1.
So he basically takes a kind of the same approach as I do to my metaphysics, which is sort of creating a structure on what depends on what and how to classify various aspects of my experience. Because if there is an interdependency between various aspects of my metaphysics, I would like to clarify those, because then the more structure there is to it, the harder for me it is to come up with some bullshit philosophy based on this structure, because then it would be very clear if I violate this structure, right? And I think there might be a point in saying that there are a lot of metaphysical philosophers who want to avoid too much structure because it limits their ability to come up with whatever they want to be the case in their philosophy, right? And how should I put it? It says a lot about your will to get somewhere, in my opinion, that can be argued, that you are presenting something as a kind of thinking about your experience, rather than potentially a lot of fancy idea of what you might want to be the case, right? And he holds back, as a good skeptic should do, right? It sounds like it, right? The headline is, and it's straight to the point. There's no bullshit, right? The origin of our ideas, it's like, okay, we're going straight to the deep end, right? There's no fluffy poetic shit or any high-flying bullshit, right? It's straight to the point. I like that.
Of the origin of our ideas. All the perceptions of the human mind resolve themselves into two distinct kinds, which I shall call impressions and ideas. The difference betwixt these consists in the degrees of force and liveliness with which they strike upon the mind and make their way into our thought or consciousness.
Okay, so there's something to unpack here, right? First of all, he creates a dichotomy. And it might not be, in my opinion, might not be the whole picture that you could possibly talk about when you're dealing with philosophy, but he doesn't necessarily say that this is all there is to talk about, right? So perceptions is what he's talking about. There might be more beyond perceptions that he's not dealing with here, right? So be careful not to think of this. This is the mind split up in two parts, sort of, right? So just be careful with that. What I am convinced he's talking about is the idea of concepts. Or I shouldn't say the idea of concept because he used the term ideas. So to respect that term, the notion of concept, I mean by a concept being, for instance, an elephant, right? And if you have an elephant, it's not like that I can think of an elephant, but I can also experience an elephant, right? He wants to say that there's a difference between thinking of an elephant and experience an elephant, right? And one way you could think about this is thinking of a tiger. If you're imagining a tiger in your living room or wherever you're sitting, or occupying space, and sort of next to you, you imagine a tiger. You can sort of have sort of an abstract, ghostly outline of a tiger, and even imagining some colors, even though there are no colors, right? But it would be different if you are actually experiencing a tiger over there, right? There would be some other kind of passions. There would be some other kind of feelings. It would be a different kind of experience, right? It would be a different kind of perception. Thinking of a tiger is not the same as experiencing a tiger, right? It's the same concept, basically, we are dealing with, but they are different in the way they arrive, so to say, right? Without clarifying further what I mean by arrive, right? But, for the lack of a better term. So that's sort of how I see it, right? There's difference between thinking of a tiger and experiencing a tiger, right?
Those perceptions which enter with most force and violence we may name impressions. And under this name, I comprehend all our sensations, passions, and emotions as they make their first appearance in the soul. By ideas, I mean the faint images of these in thinking and reasoning, such as, for instance, are all the perceptions excited by the present discourse, excepting only those which arise from the sight and touch, and excepting the immediate pleasure or uneasiness it may occasion.
Accepting the immediate pleasure and uneasiness it may occasion. Yeah, so he doesn't want to say it's about the feelings you get from the experience. That is the uneasiness of, for instance, experiencing a tiger. But I might want to go back and talk about those perceptions which enter with most force and violence. Violence is a kind of a strong word here, right? We may name impressions, and under this name I comprehend all our sensations, passions, and emotions as they make their first appearance in the soul. Now, personally, I would like to differentiate between those perceptions that can be correlated to a sense, like eye or ear or nose and so on, right? And then those that are passions and emotions, which is of a different kind. They are not directly linked to a sense. But he puts it all in one sort of, you can have some colors, you can have an elephant, you can have passion, you can have emotion. He sort of, all of that which has some kind of goings on that might trigger something in you, right? Something further in you. That's how I read it. And by ideas he made the faint images of these in thinking and reasoning, such as, for instance, are all the perceptions excited by the present discourse, excepting only those which arise from the sight and touch. Accepting the immediate pleasure on the easiness of the occasion. So it's like the idea is, as I see it, is the elephant, right? It might be more comprehensive what he means by ideas, because he can also talk about the idea of emotion and emotion. You can, various kinds of emotions, degrees of emotions have been labeled with, joy, pain, frustration, hate, right? And when you talk about them in that way, they are more like an idea of what we're talking about. They are not the actual perception. So he wants to sort of make, okay, there that which goes on down here, or up here maybe, right? And then there below that, there are various terms I use to describe or refer to whatever it is I'm talking about in my experiences. So there is also seemingly some kind of, the language I use is not that which the language refers to, right? And there might be a special case when we're dealing with these concepts, like elephant, because it's the same thing we're referring to when we are talking about the impression of an elephant and the idea of the elephant. But he points out the difference is in the force and violence that they impress themselves on you, right? So,
I believe it will not be very necessary to employ many words in explaining this distinction. Every one of himself will readily perceive the difference betwixt feeling and thinking. The common degrees of these are easily distinguished, though it is not impossible, but in particular instances, they may very nearly approach to each other. Thus, in sleep, in a fever, in madness, or in any very violent emotions of soul, our ideas may approach to our impressions. As on the other hand, it sometimes happens that our impressions are so faint and low that we cannot distinguish them from our ideas. But notwithstanding this near resemblance in a few instances, they are in general so very different that no one can make a scruple to rank them under distinct heads and assign to each a peculiar name to mark the difference.
okay, so he's pointing out that there might be particular cases where the impression is so weak, so it approaches what you would call an idea, or the idea might be so strong in a fever. If you're dreaming about an elephant, it's so strong that you almost feel like it's an impression, right? But in any, these sort of gray zones is not something that necessarily is sort of a Socratic method of refuting his dichotomy, but rather it points out that at times it might be difficult, more difficult than usually, to make the distinction. But in any normal case, there should be no problem in assigning names to each of them, as he points out, right? And it's, as I pointed out before, if you think about a tiger, is no problem, right? You're not being alarmed or anything like that, but it would be a very different experience, though it's based on the same kind of idea of a tiger. If you're actually experiencing tiger, having the impression of tiger on the floor just below or just beside you, right? So I'm on board with that, and I like that his approach, the structure of his thinking is, I'm starting out by creating a very strong dichotomy. So, okay, it's basically saying there is this experience, right? Something like that. And I'm going to say, can I classify something? Is there some kind of structure to this? What about starting out with a dichotomy? Can I make a dichotomy? Can I say, okay, all the red-haired people go over there and all the blue-haired people go over there, right? So now there's the dichotomy. There's the red-haired and the blue-haired, right? It's this kind of approach. And it's from the beginning of his treatise, right? This is very, very methodical and straight to the point, rigid kind of thinking. And I like it very much, right? Because he's setting boundaries for himself in his philosophy. He's not trying to create all sorts of possible getaway cars and carte blanche to do this and do that, leaping into some kind of weird external world where he can conjure up whatever he wants, right? No. He wants to stick to what he can talk about and hopefully appeal to the reader to make the same kind of connection to his own experience, right? So it's sort of a tandem kind of philosophy where he tries to make sure that you're on board with what he's thinking and taking it one step at a time and so on, right? I really like this.
Footnote 1. I here make use of these terms, impression and idea, in a sense different from what is usual, and I hope this liberty will be allowed me. Perhaps I rather restore the word idea to its original sense, from which Mr. Locke had perverted it in making it stand for all our perceptions. By the terms of impression, I would not be understood to express the manner in which our lively perceptions are produced in the soul, but merely the perceptions themselves, for which there is no particular name either in the English or any other language that I know of.
Okay, so he's concerned about, okay, what kind of terms do I use for this, right? And he has settled on impressions and ideas, and I find they're fine. I mean, I'm not going to tell him, at least not 300 years later, right, what terms to use. I mean, if that's the terms he wants to use and he tries to describe what he means by those terms, he is home safe as far as I can say, right? If we step back to this footnote here, sorry about that, makes use of these term impression idea in a sense different from what is usual, and I hope this liberty will be allowed me. Perhaps I rather restore the word idea to its original sense from which Mr. Locke had perverted it. So he thinks that Locke, which is John Locke, which is sort of 20, 30 years before Hume. I don't remember. It's actually more, I think. It's 50 years or something like that, possibly. Had a description of how to understand the metaphysics, right? And he has classified ideas to everything that goes on in mind, so to say, in our contemporary language. And he thinks that Mr. Locke had perverted it or misused the term to cover more than it should. And missing out on the understanding of impression. And impression, he says, is to express the manner in which our lively perceptions are produced in the soul, but merely would not to be understood to express the manner in which the lively perceptions are produced in the soul, but merely the perceptions themselves, for which there is no particular name either in English. So he's saying, okay, I have trouble describing this for you, because there is actually no real good language in the no word in the English language, and there might not even be a language that is sufficiently useful to describe metaphysics. So I have to be careful when I choose the words, and I'm trying to make you understand that these terms have been chosen by me, and it's not necessarily a common understanding of what these terms mean. And you have to adjust your thinking to the in the manner which he used them, right? And he does also say, very importantly, in my he's not trying to, though he calls the chapter here something like where the ideas come from or something like that, but he clarifies here that he's not telling you how these perceptions are produced, but it's merely a direct reference to the perception itself, in saying, these are just words that are not explanatory. They are labels to refer to kinds of aspects. So that's also important. So don't be confused. Don't bring in your own kinds of understandings of what you think these terms mean. Try to wipe that board clean and just label these think of these terms as labels for particular aspects of mind. And thereby he's saying, I am trying to label various shit and possibly come up with a structure and possibly interdependencies between various aspects of my perception, right? I think that's a very, very, very good and rigid and clear-headed and unsophistically, very clear-cut, neutral kind of philosophy. I very much like that, right?
End of footnote 1. There is another division of our perceptions which it will be convenient to observe, and which extends itself both to our impressions and ideas. This division is into simple and complex. Simple perceptions or impressions and ideas are such as admit of no distinction nor separation. The complex are the contrary to these, and may be distinguished into parts. Though a particular color, taste, and smell are qualities all united together in this apple, it is easy to perceive they are not the same, but are at least distinguishable from each other. Having by these divisions given an order and arrangement to our objects, we may now apply ourselves to consider with the more accuracy their qualities and relations. The first circumstance that strikes my eye is the great resemblance betwixt our impressions and ideas in every other particular except their degree of force and vivacity. The one seemed to be, in a manner, the reflection of the other, so that all the perceptions of the mind are double, and appear both as impressions and ideas.
In my opinion, that's along the lines I've talked about. They seem to be in a manner the reflection of each other, so that all perception of the mind are double and appear both as impressions as ideas. He's pointing to what we nowadays would call concepts, I would think, right? There might be other terms used, but I like the term concept because it seems like, and there's also, a lot of a decent amount of philosophers who call everything concepts. As long as it's not something that goes on in that external world they think they have access to, they call it a concept in the mind. That's too strong. That's too much, right? A concept is a particular aspect that can both be a representation of an idea and an impression. Right? An impression is an impression. The vivacity, the colorfulness, the sound of it is different than the idea of it. But it's the same structure. It's the same kind of, wherever it comes from. As Hume points out, he doesn't tell you, right? And he possibly won't try to tell you. He stays clear of where he can't go, right? It's very clear. It's very strong sense that he will never go. He will never try to go where he can't go. He will only go as far as he think I can refer to this, and I can make the reader understand from their first person perspective of this. I don't have to draw any drawings. I don't have to do anything. By presenting this strict philosophy, I can correlate between my thinking and the reader's thinking directly, so it's the same thing we are thinking about when I use this term. So the common part of the idea and the impression is what I would call the concept, like elephant, right?
When I shut my eyes and think of my chamber, the ideas I form are exact representations of the impressions I felt, nor is there any circumstance of the one which is not to be found in the other. In running over my other perceptions, I find still the same resemblance and representation. Ideas and impressions appear always to correspond to each other.
I like this kind of text he writes here. Ideas and impression appear always to correspond to each other. He's not trying to give you any story here. He's saying, this is how I experience it. Right? It's very strict and clear. There is no bullshit here. He's not trying to conjure up any kind of fancy story that might make you feel good or anything like that, that would correspond with your mommy's stories she told you when you were 4 years old, right? He says, I can't find any other thing that what was the term he used? Run over my perception. I find still the same resemblance and representation. Ideas and impressions. I should do this. Ideas and impressions appear always to correspond to each other. They are corresponding, they're not the same. But there is a part that is the same about them, within them. And that is the concept part. The concept, thinking of an elephant and having experience of an elephant has some similarity. And that similarity is the concept. And he says, to point that out again, when I scrutinize my experience, this is what I experience. This is what I have, right? He's relating to him philosophizing, not trying to come up with weird stories, right? He's very strict on this, right?
This circumstance seems to me remarkable and engages my attention for a moment. Upon a more accurate survey, I find I have been carried away too far by the first appearance, and that I must make use of the distinction of perceptions into simple and complex to limit this general decision that all our ideas and impressions are resembling. I observe that many of our complex ideas never had impressions that corresponded to them, and that many of our complex impressions never are exactly copied in ideas. I can imagine to myself such a city as the New Jerusalem, whose pavement is gold and walls are rubies, though I never saw any such. I have seen Paris, but shall I affirm I can form such an idea of that city as will perfectly represent all its streets and houses in their real and just proportions? I perceive, therefore, that though there is in general a great resemblance betwixt our complex impressions and ideas, yet the rule is not universally true, that they are exact copies of each other.
Now, I'm not fond of him using the term true in this particular part of his philosophy, because I would say that true is a reference to knowledge, and this is metaphysics, right? He cannot possibly have arrived at knowledge when he's starting at this point in metaphysics. But giving him a large stretch with the terms, I would just like there are certain particular terms like true, false, knowledge, certainty, existence, moral principle. These are very, very core aspects of a philosophy that also people who do not generally use philosophy to get to any conclusions about their experience use these terms left and right. So they are important terms. So it's only in the case where I really, really want to point out that I have in modern times would have a problem with the use of that kind of term. And in this case, using the term true is not a good idea in my understanding, right? Okay.
We may next consider how the case stands with our simple perceptions. After the most accurate examination of which I am capable, I venture to affirm that the rule here holds without any exception, and that every simple idea has a simple impression which resembles it, and every simple impression a correspondent idea. that idea of red which we form in the dark and that impression which strikes our eyes in sunshine differ only in degree, not in nature. That the
Okay, so that's an interesting thought. That when I try to imagine red, it's kind of the same as if I experienced red. I would think that there's an interdependency that he might not have thought of. That I only have the idea of red because I had an impression of red, right? The impression comes, the ideas come only because of the impressions. If there were no impressions, there would be no ideas. But you would be able to have impressions without having the idea. You would probably just not be aware of the impressions. But because I'm aware of the impressions, I have to have the ideas in order to be aware of the impression. So you can say that the source of red is the same in both cases, because the red impression is the source of the red idea. So maybe that's what he's trying to say. It's not completely clear, but my metaphysics would be that you could, in a way, you could say that I would suppose that some kind of sea slug would have impressions, but it wouldn't have any ideas. It would just have some kind of impression, something going on in there that just says, action, solution. There's an impression that goes on there that ignites an action. Like if something bumps into it, it moves in a certain direction. There are certain beetles, I think, that when you lift a rock from standing on the ground, there are all these sort of beetles underneath, and they sort of scurry around. It's not because they're afraid or anything like that. It's because that they don't like light. And what they do is they keep running. And when they get to a point where they sense light is lower in a certain direction, then they will go in that direction, and they will keep going until they find a place where there is no light, and then they will stay there. And that's usually below rocks, right? So it's this sort of impression action. There's probably no ideas there, right? It's just an I can't get to it. It's a problem of other minds, right? But it's this kind of thinking. I have an idea of it. I can imagine those impressions based on cognitions called, for instance, elephant, right? So that I can imagine shit here, sitting in my sofa, imagine all sorts of things that I would like to see an elephant, for instance, right? I don't think sea slugs are thinking, I would like to see whatever sea slugs are thinking about, right? Maybe it's a bad example, but I think that he's trying to set up a dichotomy where there might actually be some interdependency, in my opinion. But I'm willing to go there. It seems like he says it's more complex than just impression and idea. There are sort of complex shit and simple shit, right? And I'm thinking of, let's say, for instance, an elephant. Or, an elephant, right? It has legs. But there are other shit that has legs. I have legs, right? So there's a concept leg that is sort of a simple thing that simple sub-concept can be a part of another more complex concept, like a human being, which also has legs. And the leg is an attachment I make because it's based on its function and so on, right? But this kind of looking at each of the perceptions and saying, well, it might be made up of some smaller shit. And that smaller shit might be common to various more complex, the complexity of an elephant and the complexity of a human being. They both have legs. But a leg is a unique, a particular, there is nothing that is made of legs, or legs that is made of. Leg is a sub-concept to the more complex concept that is the lowest differentiation within the concept, right? Legs are not made of, maybe you could say that a leg has a knee and a foot and, something like that. But that's just the structure of a particular leg. But a bigger concept like an elephant can have 4 legs, right? So there's a repetition of the same sub-concept or the same simple idea maybe. I'm not sure if that's what he's talking about. That would be my sort of interpretation or trying to clarify it when I compare it to my own thinking, right?
The case is the same with all our simple impressions and ideas. It is impossible to prove by a particular enumeration of them. Everyone may satisfy himself in this point by running over as many as he pleases. But if anyone should deny this universal resemblance,
again, he says, everyone may satisfy himself at this point by running over as many as he pleases. So it's like you can do this by yourself. Don't just trust me and what I'm saying. Search yourself. Check out your own experience. Check out your own perceptions and so on, right? Can you find can you find something that goes against this idea or this kind of philosophy? He's appealing to this being a kind of, we're doing this together, right? He's inviting you into his thinking. He's not sitting there on his ivory tower telling everybody, I have a message. You should listen to me. I have made Bernardo Castro, an essential foundation. We are on a crusade to change the world. The world is not functioning. We have come up with a better idea and everybody should do this. No. He's trying to invite you into a sort of basic thinking. That's the starting point, right? It's sort of disarming in a way, right? I very much like that. Very much like that. He's the only one I can think of that writes this way. And it's very satisfying to be a part of, right?
resemblance, I know no way of convincing him but by desiring him to shew a simple impression that has not a correspondent idea, or a simple idea that has not a correspondent impression. If he
No, but that's why I'm saying that insight or philosophy might point to that there is an interdependency between impressions and ideas, right? The impressions are first, and then he didn't have an idea of evolution, for instance, right? So that kind of mental idea of things evolving over time might not be as strong a sense in him as it is in nowadays, right? So things can change throughout time, right? That may not be as clear to him as it is to us nowadays. But where I was going for, so I think it's obvious, to me at least, that there's an interdependency between impressions and ideas, to use his terms. That impressions or that ideas are remnants or snapshots, you could say, structural snapshots of a kind, useful snapshots of impressions, so that I can imagine future impressions. If I can't imagine them, as soon as the impression is gone, I have no knowledge of it, right? So that which I want to know about potential impressions in the future, I would like to have an idea of, right? So if I have an idea of prior impressions, I can use that idea to say, I would like to go and have that impression of elephant or tomato or, banana in the future. Because there's something about those impressions that are valuable. Like a banana, I can eat it, right?
If he does not answer this challenge, as it is certain he cannot, we may from his silence and our own observation establish our conclusion. Thus we find that all simple ideas and impressions resemble each other, and as the complex are formed from them, we may affirm in general that these two species of perception are exactly correspondent. Having discovered this relation, which requires no farther examination, I am curious to find some other of their qualities. Let us consider how they stand with regard to their existence, and which of the impressions and ideas are causes and which effects.
Okay, so this should be interesting, right? I think I will make a note where I have come so far. This is the blue. So this is where we have to kick off the next time. Maybe I should make a mark here. We are going, this is a long, I think it's 18 minutes. So we are halfway through this part here. So I can't fit that possibly into, we're going into, it's a deeper end now, right? I can't fit this into a 1 hour. I would like to be, or just below at least 1 hour long video here. So I will split this one in 2 parts, and please share, like, and subscribe. Consider a donation. I would appreciate that very much. It will encourage me to keep going. And otherwise, see you in the next one.